What's the question?
Okay.
I just wanted to know. Thank you very much, sir, for your presentation. As a lawyer, I want to ask you, there's a part of the Constitution that provides for certain needs for the people, and they've been deemed as impossible. So I want to ask, is it possible for the Senate, for the legislature, to pass a legislation in the form of a document where those things like social security, like education, like health, is it possible for the Senate to provide a document wherein possibly there's a president coming in, a newly elected president, he can sign those things like, okay, we know that this president is going to have like this, he's going to provide us with energy, he's going to provide us with health and stuff like that. So I want to ask legal veracity of that. Thank you.
Okay. Let me very quickly say that first, it's entirely possible for us to have legislation with respect to some of the things we've talked about. It's possible to have social security legislation, for example. It's possible to say that a certain percentage of budget will go to social security. There are all sorts of possibilities. Generally speaking, people will argue that you don't want to legislate. For instance, you cannot, it's difficult to say you must have free education by legislation, because there may not be enough to provide for free education and all of that kind of thing. But it's entirely possible. I mean, if your question is that, is it possible? Of course, it's possible. In fact, in many places in the world, social security is legislated. It is law that there must be social security for certain people in society. What that social security amounts to, how much it comes to, is of course quite another matter. That would be a matter of budget. But of course it's entirely possible to have legislation that says you must have social security for this or for that person. For instance, if you look at the debate that's going on now in the US about Obamacare, that is a law, a legislation that President Obama pushed and ensured, and this is health coverage for some of the most vulnerable people in that society. And it is a law. So there is still a lot of back and forth about it, a lot of arguments, but it is law anyway. So it's entirely possible. Entirely possible.
We have the question of 9. It says, sir, to get a welfare state, we need a competent civil service and high tax rates. How do we get both?
Yeah. Well, I'm not so sure that a welfare state is necessarily what I am talking about. But I am saying that there is a place for social expenditure, spending money on the poorest in society, so that the poorest in society have a real chance to make a living for themselves, to make a decent existence for themselves and for their families. Now, it is true indeed that somebody has to pay for it. That is true. Already we have a taxation system, but unfortunately most people are out of the tax net. So from now, where we're all deriving our resources from, by and large, is from oil. And we're saying that even from that oil, if we are concerned enough about it, if we are concerned enough about issues of poverty, there's absolutely no reason why we cannot provide food intervention for children in primary schools, why we can't provide some levels of science and technology education that is state-funded, given out of tablets to the laptops and all of that to children in secondary school, and all of those kinds of things. Social security for the poorest and the disabled. Those are entirely possible within the kind of financial constraints we even have now. They're entirely possible. So my take is that without even having what you would describe as a welfare state, Yes, we do need a strong civil service. That's a problem, but we are doing other things with the civil service as we have it. So it cannot be an excuse not to provide for the poorest, to say that we must wait until we have a strong enough bureaucracy and taxes that can pay for it. Whatever it is that we're sharing, a portion of it is absolutely important for those who cannot work. A portion of it is important for those who have been disempowered by the system one way or the other. And in many parts of the world, and many of the surveys and researches that have been done, it is clear that economic growth and equity go hand in hand. Equity meaning taking care of those who might have been left behind by society one way or the other. It's absolutely important. And I think that governments must be held to account. In fact, when you look at social schemes, and look at the sheer numbers that they deal with, you find that it is even more difficult for governments to be corrupt when they have commitments, large commitments to people. Now, if for instance, I want to build, if I say in one state somewhere, I want to build a massive bridge for 100 billion, it's easier for me to be corrupt, right? But if that 100 billion is going to social services for 1 million people, those 1 million people, most of them will pay attention to it. If you don't give them, they'll ask. So I think that social expenditure in our current situation is so important. And I think that it's something we ought to do.
So, just one final question. We have from Laulu Alabi. It says, won't the efforts of the government of Nigeria in trying to regulate the activity trend of the internet adversely affect tech creativity?
Well, I'm not so sure that they can, even the regulation, I'm not so sure how they want to affect that kind of regulation. And it's important for us to be very careful about regulation, extremely important, because regulation might mean censorship, and it might mean controlling the social media in a manner that might defeat some of the gains that we're getting from the social media. So we have to be very careful about regulation. In fact, constitutionally, we have a right to freedom of expression, constitutionally. And there's no reason why that right should not be expanded. There's no reason why it should be reduced. Now, there are people who will say, for instance, that we don't want social media to be used for obscenities, we don't want it to be used for pornography and those kinds of things. Yes, entirely possible for us to say that there must be ways of ensuring that young children don't go to websites or are not exposed to websites that are injurious to their moral health. Entirely possible. But I think it's something we need to be extremely careful about. I am for more freedom, certainly, not constricting freedom. And those who have to police it usually develop their own agenda. So for me, I prefer that we keep within the confines of the law, within the confines of the Constitution, and whenever any of our rights are going to be taken away, we debate it well, subject it to close scrutiny, and we don't just allow a regulator to come and say we're going to take over. Yeah.
Professor, thank you so very much.
Thank you.
Please just give me a round of applause once more.
All right, we've come to the end of Platform 11.0. I'd like to thank all our speakers for coming, and also I'd like to thank all the members of Covenant Christian Center. Now, because I need to put this on record, because people see me publicly and ask us, how do we get money to finance Platform? The money comes solely from the contributions of members of Covenant Christian Center. All right? Every single dime we spend here comes from within the church. So we have no outside funding or sponsorship of any kind whatsoever. And you don't say this in public if it is not so, because it can be checked. God bless you all, and thank you for watching. And we'll see you next year. But let me just say this, we'll also continue to have the Platform experience now. Throughout the entire year, we're breaking it up into Platform Tech, into Platform Green, into Platform Interactive. So those of you who are registered members of the community, you'll be receiving communication